Long before there was a Bear Cove marina or barges coming in to dredge it out, this whole area on the south shore of Massachusetts was known as Bear Cove. For a short while at least. By 1635, the name was officially changed to Hingham, and for the past few hundred years, this place has done pretty well, turning itself into a fine and upstanding town. Anyone who's ever heard a weekday evening traffic report will know it for the dreaded lane drop at the Derby Street exit. But beyond that, it's a town that covers over 26 square miles of land and water, has a bustling downtown which hosts community events that tend to bring people together of all ages to share in the good times. And it still has plenty of conservation land to enjoy. For example, Weir River Farm on Turkey Hill Lane avails its 75 acres of functioning farmland and trails to the public, not only during their spring and fall festivals, but year-round. And while there may be no one else around during the winter months but a few goats, it's a great place to stop by and soak in the clear view of Boston from one of the highest points of elevation in town. Of course, in a town whose origins date back to the 1600s, there's no shortage of locations for the Historical Society to showcase as well, like the Old Ship Church Meeting House on Main Street. And yet, all of this is still just scratching the surface of what this town has to offer. For commuters and travelers, Hingham may be nothing more than a highway sign they pass driving along Route 3. But for nearly 25,000 residents, it's a place they call home, send their kids to school, and of course, go to work. So we thought we'd spend 5 days, or one work week here, in the cozy South Shore town of Hingham, Massachusetts. Route 228 is one of the more commonly used roadways to get in and out of the town of Hingham. In this one area that covers less than a quarter block, passers through can get a glimpse of old-school New England nostalgia, from the country market that looks like something straight off a movie set, to the babbling brook that runs under the roadway and through the surrounding neighborhood, or these stone retaining walls that appear as though they could date back to the 1600s, to the sign with wording that probably seems confusing to anyone not from Massachusetts. One thing that can't be seen from this roadway, however, is one of the town's greatest assets.
One of the great things about Hingham is the amount of green space that's open to the public. Hingham is about 14,500 acres in total, and over 30% of that, or 4,500 acres, is open space.
Our first trip through the woods of Hingham takes us to Jacob's Meadow, which features a network of maintained loop trails. The trails themselves are minimally challenging, but offer visitors a nice tranquil escape from the noise of the modern world under the cover of countless pine and beech trees. Overall, the property covers roughly 100 acres, 40 of which belong to the Hingham Land Conservation Trust.
The 40 acres that's owned by the Hingham Land Conservation Trust was donated by a woman named Helen Burns, who was one of the founding members of the Hingham Land Conservation Trust in 1972. She went about purchasing actually the property in small bits and pieces here and there until she had accumulated about 40 acres and then donated it to us, and it was officially opened up as a property owned by the Hingham Land Conservation Trust in 1991.
Hikers along the paths may feel as though they're far removed from the world at large as they trek under the tree canopies, but in truth, this property is hidden in plain sight, particularly from the entrance off of Route 228.
There's two main public access points. The main one is right behind Wilder Memorial Hall, where the Wilder Nursery School is. So you can't access the property through there while the school is in session, and usually they let out about 3:30 in the afternoon, and they're not in session on weekends. So there's a little gate at the back of the property that you walk through, and then there's a little trail that leads up to the property from here. There's one more access point, which is off of South Pleasant Street, and that gives you access to an abutting property owned by the town called the Laner property, but it connects with the trail network to Jacob's Meadow, so you can get there from here as well.
Although he's endured much more rigorous hikes and climbs across the country, Art Collins still has a special affinity for this locale here in Hingham.
The thing that's so great about this piece of property, and when I say it's the crown jewel, I don't just mean the meadow itself, that the whole property is known as Jacob's Meadow. It's just because it's 100 acres of contiguous, space. Because outside of Wampatuck State Park, there's nowhere else in town where you can get that big of a piece of land, that you can walk through.
Its accessibility and easily hikeable trails also make it an ideal lunch break getaway.
It's a pretty short hike if you don't stop too much. It would be sort of a nice lunchtime hike or an afternoon break. It's also a really nice area to come out in the winter and do some cross-country skiing if we have snow. We haven't had a lot of that lately, though.
But while cross-country skis may be welcome here, bicycles are not. They are welcome at Wampatuck State Park, however. In fact, all non-motorized modes of transportation are welcome on the trails here, although mountain bikes seem to be the most popular. Plenty of folks around will recognize this building as the home of the Winter Farmers Market. But it's also one of the most visitor-friendly and helpful visitor centers, offering up the kind of step-by-step help that they can take with them out into the wilderness. When I'm out in the woods, I like to take my compass with me because all it takes is one wrong turn before I find myself completely upside down. The Friends of Wampatuck have done me one better by making an interactive map on their website that folks can access on their mobile devices anytime that they're out on these trails.
You can either go to the Friends of Wampatuck site and there's an interactive map there, or you can come to Wampatuck and at the trailheads you'll find a QR code. You can just ring into that and you'll get the map right there.
Even without all of that digital assistance, Gamma thinks that it would be difficult to get completely lost here at Wampatuck due to the amount of wide old military roads that crisscross the property, along with the fact that it's such a heavily traveled park that there's almost always someone around to offer guidance. He ought to know, having made a career here starting only a few years after it opened as a DCR state park.
I started here in 1974 and I worked till 2015 and I retired. I was the park supervisor for some of those years. And it was a long, interesting career here, all at Wampatuck.
As a first-time visitor, I really enjoyed the trails off the trails. My vernal pool enthusiast friends would have gotten a kick out of the jackpot that I discovered at the top of this hill. Vernal pools are only around from April through May, tend to be no more than a foot deep, and since there are no fish in them, amphibians like salamanders, newts, and frogs leave their egg clusters here. Pretty neat. I was also impressed with just how massive 3,500 acres can be. The park features a campground with 250 sites, even a place for hunters. In one day, visitors can travel from Hingham to Norwell to Cohasset and to Scituate and not leave the park. And while I love the seemingly endless forest trails, Gammon likes to shine a light on the 12 miles of paved roads here.
There's lots of different types of trails. One of the most important type is our paved trails because they're handicapped accessible. So it's a great park. There's miles and miles of trails that somebody can come in that's confined to a wheelchair. Most of all our trails are multi-use trails, meaning that, from cross-country skiers to mountain bikers to hikers, dog walkers, can use all of them. And that's a great thing. There's no conflicts with groups that way.
And if we're looking for anyone to thank for keeping this place in tip-top shape, look no further than to the Friends of Wampatuck. So, who exactly is this group of volunteer do-gooders?
Well, the Friends of Wampatuck is an organization of people that are just plain interested in Wampatuck, and we just work on trails and do other good things for Wampatuck to make sure that it's a good, peaceful, and nice place to come.
Our final stop on this journey takes us to a place that tends to make its visitors feel as though they've reached the end of the earth and find themselves surrounded by some of the most glorious elements of nature. The location, of course, is aptly named World's End, and this 250-acre peninsula is just one of over 120 properties under the purview of the trustees of reservations. And while no one doubts the almost transformative experience that people have in visiting this locale, one thing that is up for debate is just how exactly this place got its name.
During the colonial era and then into, the federal period after we became a nation, there was still an active fox hunt through Cohasset and Hingham, and the drivers on their horses would chase all the foxes through the land out here. And so the name World's End is thought to have come out of that story, that it was the end of the world for the foxes.
The property is surrounded by water from the entrance point onward and made up of 3 hills known as drumlins, the first being Planter's Hill, followed by Pine Hill, before eventually taking travelers out to World's End proper. With views of Hingham Harbor up to the skyline of Boston on one side and Weir River on the other, one thing for certain is that no matter the time of year, there will always be visitors here.
Predominantly on weekdays, mornings, evenings, you have a local crowd. Folks coming from the neighborhood that we're in, the rest of Hingham, Cohasset, the rest of the South Shore, walk their dogs, spend quiet time with their family. On the weekends, this is a draw for people across Massachusetts. The title draws people in, the views have people staying. So it's a draw for everyone in the Commonwealth.
There's certainly a choose-your-own-adventure feel to the property. But unlike the books from my childhood, all of the outcomes here are good ones. For those who want to see things at ocean level, this is certainly an option. For anyone hoping for a bird's eye view of the world below, that too is a possibility, with very enjoyable results. There's no shortage of members of the animal kingdom here as well, some that are to be expected, and others that may be a bit surprising. What isn't surprising, however, is that people who spend time in nature tend to find themselves in better states of being during and after the experience. Studies have shown that this has everything to do with the positive effect that being outdoors and in the forest not only has on one's physical health, but also their mental health.
The more access we have to open spaces, access to nature, the better chance we have of healthy, happy communities, of the next generation growing up with an understanding of why our environment is critical to our well-being. So the more times people have access to open space, places like this, the better off we are as a society, town of Hingham. This place is special.
Good form tonight.